Have you ever looked back on a relationship and wondered why you gave so much of yourself away? Why you dimmed your own light to make someone else comfortable? Why you abandoned parts of who you are just to keep the peace or hold on to someone who wasn't holding on to you with the same care and commitment? If you're a woman over 60, you've lived long enough to know that love shouldn't require you to erase yourself. You've earned your wisdom through experience, sometimes painful experience, and now is the time to honor that wisdom by setting boundaries that protect your peace, your dignity, and your sense of self. Today, we're going to talk about 10 things you should never do for a man at this stage of your life. Not because you're incapable of these things, not because you're being selfish or difficult, but because you deserve relationships built on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and authentic love. These aren't rules designed to push men away. They're standards designed to attract the right kind of partnership while protecting you from dynamics that drain your energy and diminish your worth. This isn't about becoming hard or closed off. It's about becoming wise and discerning. It's about understanding that at 60 and beyond, you don't have time to waste on relationships that require you to betray yourself. So stay with me, because what I'm about to share could fundamentally transform how you approach relationships from this day forward. Welcome back to The Heart Code, where we explore the psychology of relationships with honesty, depth, and a commitment to your emotional well-being. I'm so glad you're here today, because this conversation is one that many women need to hear, but rarely encounter in our culture's ongoing narrative about what women should do to attract and keep a man. Before we dive deep into today's topic, I want to ask you to do something that helps this channel continue bringing you this kind of content. If you find value in what we discuss today, please take a moment to like this video. Your like tells YouTube that this content matters, which means it will reach more women who need to hear this message. And if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our conversations about relationship psychology, emotional intelligence, and personal empowerment. I also want to encourage you to leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts on today's topic. Have you struggled with any of these behaviors? Have you learned to set boundaries in these areas? Your insights could be exactly what another woman needs to hear to give her the courage to honor herself. And if you're able, please consider supporting this channel with a super thanks. Your financial support, no matter how small, allows me to continue creating content that prioritizes your emotional well-being over clickbait and sensationalism. Now, let's talk about why this topic matters so much, especially for women in their 60s and beyond. Society has long conditioned women to be caregivers, peacemakers, and selfless nurturers. These aren't inherently negative qualities, but they become toxic when they're expected without reciprocity, when they're demanded as proof of your love, or when they require you to abandon your own needs, dreams, and boundaries. By the time you reach 60, you've likely spent decades caring for others. You've raised children, supported partners, cared for aging parents, built careers, and navigated countless challenges that required you to be strong, adaptable, and resilient. You've earned the right to prioritize your own well-being without guilt. You've earned the right to say no without lengthy explanations. You've earned the right to expect reciprocity in your relationships. Yet many women at this stage of life find themselves falling into familiar patterns, doing things for men that compromise their dignity, drain their energy, and diminish their sense of self. Sometimes this happens because these patterns are so deeply ingrained that they feel automatic. Sometimes it happens because we fear being alone more than we fear losing ourselves. Sometimes it happens because we genuinely believe that this is what love requires. But here's what I want you to understand as we move through today's discussion. Real love, mature love, healthy love never requires you to diminish yourself. It never demands that you prove your worth through endless sacrifice. It never asks you to tolerate disrespect, manipulation, or emotional unavailability. Real love sees you, values you, and meets you with the same care and commitment you offer. The 10 things we're going to discuss today are behaviors and patterns that you should never engage in for a man, regardless of how much you care about him, regardless of how lonely you might feel, and regardless of what society tells you about what women should do to maintain relationships. These boundaries aren't about being difficult or demanding. They're about honoring the wisdom you've gained and the life you've built. So let's get started with the first thing senior women should never do for men. Thing number 1, never abandon your own life, friends, and interests to accommodate his schedule and preferences. One of the most damaging patterns women fall into, especially when they're excited about a new relationship or trying to revive an existing one, is the gradual abandonment of their own life in favor of their partner's world. This looks like canceling plans with friends whenever he becomes available. It looks like giving up hobbies and activities you love because he's not interested in them. It looks like structuring your entire schedule around his availability, his preferences, and his priorities. At 60 and beyond, you've built a life. You have friendships that have sustained you through difficult times. You have interests that bring you joy and fulfillment. You have routines and rhythms that support your well-being. When you abandon these things to accommodate a man, you're not demonstrating love or commitment. You're demonstrating that you believe his life, his time, and his interests are more valuable than your own. This pattern often starts subtly. He mentions he doesn't really like your book club friends, so you start attending less frequently. He prefers to stay home on weekends, so you gradually stop going to the art galleries or concerts you used to enjoy. He wants to spend every available moment together, so you begin declining invitations from friends. Before you realize what's happening, you've isolated yourself from the support systems and activities that once nourished your soul. The psychology behind this pattern is complex. For many women, especially those who were raised during eras when women were expected to make themselves small and accommodating, this kind of self-abandonment feels natural, even virtuous. We were taught that good women prioritize their partner's happiness above their own. We were taught that love means sacrifice. We were taught that maintaining harmony in a relationship requires flexibility, which too often meant contorting ourselves into whatever shape made our partner comfortable. But here's what decades of psychological research tells us about healthy relationships. Partners who maintain their individual identities, friendships, and interests actually have stronger, more satisfying relationships than those who merge completely. When you have your own life, you bring fresh energy, new perspectives, and interesting experiences back to the relationship. You have something to talk about other than the relationship itself. You maintain the sense of mystery and independence that keeps attraction alive. More importantly, when you maintain your own life, you protect yourself from the devastating isolation that can occur if the relationship ends. If you've abandoned your friends, given up your hobbies, and structured your entire existence around a man, what happens when he decides to leave, when he passes away, or when the relationship simply runs its course? You find yourself alone and disconnected from the support systems and activities that once gave your life meaning. I've worked with countless women who found themselves in exactly this situation. They had been so focused on being the perfect partner, on accommodating their man's every preference, that they had let their friendships atrophy. They had stopped doing the things they loved. They had made their partner the center of their universe. And when that relationship ended, they felt completely lost, unable to remember who they had been before they had molded themselves into what they thought he wanted. The healthy alternative is to maintain firm boundaries around your existing life while making space for a partner within it. This means being clear from the beginning of a relationship that you have commitments to friends, regular activities you participate in, and interests you pursue independently. It means declining invitations sometimes because you already have plans, even if those plans are just time alone doing something you enjoy. It means inviting him into your world rather than abandoning your world for his. A secure, emotionally healthy man will respect this. In fact, he'll appreciate that you have a full life because it means you're choosing to be with him out of genuine desire rather than desperate need. He'll understand that your friendships and interests aren't threats to the relationship, but rather essential aspects of who you are. He might even be inspired to maintain his own friendships and pursuits, rather than expecting you to be his entire social world. On the other hand, a man who sulks when you have plans that don't include him, who criticizes your friends, who makes you feel guilty for pursuing your interests, or who constantly pressures you to spend all your time with him is showing you red flags that should not be ignored. This kind of behavior isn't born from love. It's born from insecurity, possessiveness, and a need to control. And it will only intensify over time if you reward it by abandoning your life to accommodate his demands. At this stage of your life, you should be adding to your experiences, not subtracting from them. A relationship should enhance your life, not replace it. You should feel more alive, more engaged, more yourself when you're with the right person, not less. And that can only happen when you maintain the parts of your life that make you who you are. So this is the first boundary to set firmly. You will not abandon your life, your friends, or your interests for any man. You will make space for partnership while maintaining the foundations that support your well-being. You will expect any man in your life to respect and appreciate that you are a complete person with a full life, not an empty vessel waiting to be filled by his presence. Thing number 2, never accept crumbs of attention and affection. While telling yourself it's enough, the second thing you must never do for a man is accept breadcrumbs of attention, affection, and effort while convincing yourself that this is all you deserve or all you can expect at this stage of life. This is one of the most heartbreaking patterns I see in mature women who have internalized the message that they should be grateful for any male attention, that their value has somehow diminished with age, and that expecting consistent care and commitment is unrealistic or demanding. Breadcrumbing looks like a man who texts you occasionally, but never makes concrete plans. It looks like someone who shows up in your life when it's convenient for him, but disappears when you need support. It looks like a partner who gives you just enough attention to keep you hopeful, but never enough to build actual intimacy and security. It looks like someone who keeps you in a perpetual state of uncertainty about where you stand and whether you matter to him. The psychology behind why women accept breadcrumbs is deeply rooted in low self-worth, fear of being alone, and societal messaging about women's declining value after a certain age. Our culture bombards women with the message that youth equals desirability, that aging makes us invisible, and that we should lower our standards and be grateful for whatever attention we receive. This toxic narrative convinces intelligent, accomplished, beautiful women that they're lucky if a man shows them any interest at all. But let me tell you something crucial. Your worth has not diminished with age. Your need for genuine connection, consistent affection, and respectful treatment has not expired. Your right to expect effort, clarity, and commitment from a romantic partner did not evaporate when you turned 60. In fact, at this stage of life, you have more wisdom, more self-knowledge, and more clarity about what you need than you ever did when you were younger. You should be raising your standards, not lowering them. When you accept breadcrumbs, you're training the person giving them that this level of minimal effort is acceptable. You're communicating that you don't expect much, that you'll wait patiently for whatever scraps of attention he chooses to offer, and that you won't hold him accountable for inconsistency or emotional unavailability. And most men, when given this permission to show up minimally, will take it. This doesn't make them terrible people. It makes them human. When we teach people how to treat us through what we accept, they will generally do exactly that. If you accept sporadic texts and last-minute invitations, that's what you'll continue to receive. If you accept vague comments about getting together sometime without actual plans, that pattern will persist. If you accept excuses and explanations for why he can't be more present, more consistent, or more committed, he has no reason to change because you've shown him that his minimal effort is sufficient. The alternative is to have clear standards about what acceptable behavior looks like in a romantic relationship, and to enforce those standards through your actions, not just your words. This means not rewarding breadcrumbing behavior with your continued availability, attention, and emotional investment. It means being willing to walk away from connections that leave you feeling uncertain, anxious, and unvalued, no matter how much potential you see or how lonely you might feel. I understand how difficult this can be when you're attracted to someone, when you've started to develop feelings, when you've allowed yourself to hope that this might turn into something meaningful. Walking away from breadcrumbs feels like giving up on possibility. You tell yourself that maybe he's just busy, maybe he's dealing with something difficult, maybe he'll become more consistent once he works through whatever is holding him back. You make excuses for his behavior because facing the truth that he's simply not that interested or invested feels too painful. But here's what you need to understand. A man who is genuinely interested in you, who values you, and who wants to build something real with you will show up consistently. He will make time for you. He will communicate clearly about his intentions and his availability. He will follow through on plans. He will make you feel secure in his interest rather than constantly questioning where you stand. This doesn't mean he'll be perfect or that he'll never have busy periods or stressful times that affect his availability. It means that even during challenging periods, he'll communicate with you about what's happening. He'll maintain some level of consistent contact, and he'll make it clear that you matter to him and that he values the connection you're building. When you're receiving breadcrumbs instead of consistent effort, you're not in a relationship. You're in a situation where someone is keeping you as an option, as a backup plan, as something to turn to when they're bored or lonely, but not as a priority they're actively investing in. And you deserve so much more than that. At this stage of your life, you don't have time to waste on maybes and some days. You don't have energy to squander on people who can't or won't show up for you fully. You don't have emotional bandwidth to invest in connections that leave you feeling anxious and unvalued. You need to be ruthlessly protective of your time, your energy, and your heart. This means setting a standard that you will only invest in people who match your investment. It means being willing to end connections that aren't reciprocal, even if that leaves you alone for a while. It means trusting that it's better to be alone and at peace than to be in a pseudo-relationship that keeps you in a constant state of hope and disappointment. And here's something powerful that happens when you stop accepting breadcrumbs. You reclaim your energy and your attention. Instead of obsessively checking your phone, waiting for his sporadic texts, you redirect that focus toward your own life, your own interests, your own well-being. Instead of arranging your schedule around his unpredictable availability, you fill your time with activities and people who actually show up for you consistently. Moreover, when you stop rewarding breadcrumbing behavior with your continued availability, one of two things will happen. Either the person will step up and start showing up more consistently because they realize you're serious about your standards, or they'll disappear completely, and both outcomes are actually wins for you. Either you get someone who is willing to treat you with the respect you deserve, or you eliminate someone who was never going to give you what you need. Thing number 3, never tolerate disrespect. Under the guise of his humor, honesty, or personality, the third thing you must never do is tolerate disrespectful behavior that's disguised as jokes, brutal honesty, or simply who he is as a person. This is an insidious pattern because it allows someone to treat you poorly while making you feel like you're the problem if you object. It puts you in a position where calling out mistreatment gets reframed as you being too sensitive, unable to take a joke, or trying to change someone's authentic self. Disrespect disguised as humor looks like jokes at your expense, especially about your appearance, your intelligence, your age, or any insecurity he knows you have. It looks like sarcastic comments that sting even though they're delivered with a smile. It looks like mocking you in front of others and then acting like you're overreacting when you express that it hurt. This kind of behavior is particularly damaging because it creates confusion. You know something feels wrong, but the person delivering the hurt is laughing. So maybe you're supposed to laugh too. Maybe you're being too serious. Maybe you can't take a joke. But here's the truth. Genuine humor in healthy relationships doesn't leave one person feeling diminished. It doesn't target insecurities or vulnerabilities. It doesn't require an audience to witness your humiliation. When someone consistently makes jokes at your expense and then criticizes you for not finding them funny, that's not humor. That's cruelty with a laugh track. Disrespect disguised as honesty looks like someone who prides himself on telling it like it is, who claims he's just being real with you, who frames harsh criticism as helpful feedback you should appreciate. This person will say cutting things about your appearance, your choices, your past, or your personality, and then act offended if you're hurt because he was just being honest. He'll tell you that you should value his honesty, that most people are too fake to tell you the truth, that he's actually doing you a favor by pointing out your flaws. But there's a massive difference between honest communication in service of the relationship and brutal honesty that serves someone's need to feel superior. Healthy honesty is delivered with care, with consideration for your feelings, and with the intention of supporting you and strengthening the connection. It's thoughtful about timing and delivery. It's balanced with affirmation and appreciation. Brutal honesty that's delivered without care, without sensitivity, and without regard for how it lands is just cruelty that someone has rebranded as virtue. Disrespect disguised as personality looks like someone who says, "That's just how I am," when you address hurtful behavior. He's always been sarcastic, so you should expect sarcastic comments even when they sting. He's naturally critical, so you should accept his constant critique of your choices. He's not good at emotional stuff, so you should lower your expectations for emotional support and validation. He's brutally honest, so you should develop thicker skin. This reframing of problematic behavior as unchangeable personality traits is a manipulation tactic that serves to make you responsible for managing your reactions to his poor treatment, rather than making him responsible for treating you with basic respect. It puts the burden on you to adapt to behavior that's hurtful rather than on him to consider how his behavior impacts the person he claims to care about. At 60 and beyond, you have spent enough time on this earth to recognize the difference between someone who occasionally misspeaks or makes a thoughtless comment and someone who consistently disrespects you under various disguises. You know what genuine affection and respect feel like. You know the difference between constructive feedback delivered with care and criticism delivered to make you feel small. Trust that knowledge. When someone repeatedly hurts you and then makes you feel like the problem for being hurt, you're dealing with someone who lacks empathy, who doesn't value your feelings, and who is more invested in maintaining their right to behave however they want, than in treating you with kindness. This is not a person who will suddenly develop consideration and respect if you just explain yourself better or develop thicker skin. This is a person who has shown you who they are and you need to believe them. The appropriate response to disrespect in any form is to name it clearly and set a boundary. When he makes a joke at your expense, you calmly say, "That wasn't funny to me, and I don't appreciate being the target of your humor." When he delivers brutal honesty, you respond by saying, "I value honest communication, but I need it to be delivered with kindness and respect." When he says, "That's just how I am," you reply with, "And this is how I am." Someone who doesn't accept disrespectful treatment regardless of how it's packaged. What happens next will tell you everything you need to know. A person with good character who genuinely cares about you will hear your boundary, apologize for hurting you, and modify their behavior. They might not be perfect at it immediately, but you'll see genuine effort to be more mindful about how they speak to you and treat you. They'll take responsibility for their impact rather than defending their intent. A person who responds to your boundary with defensiveness, with minimizing your feelings, with more criticism of your sensitivity, or with accusations that you're trying to change them, is showing you that they value their right to treat you however they want more than they value your emotional well-being. This is someone who will continue to hurt you and make you feel like it's your fault. This is someone you need to distance yourself from. You have lived too many years, weathered too many storms, and built too much wisdom to accept disrespect in your life. You do not need to tolerate someone who makes you feel small, who targets your vulnerabilities, or who tries to convince you that mistreatment is something you should accept with a smile. You deserve to be treated with kindness, consideration, and respect, and those things should be non-negotiable in any relationship you engage in at this stage of your life. Thing number 4, never justify, defend, or make excuses for his poor behavior to others or yourself. The fourth thing you must never do is take on the role of public relations manager for a man's poor behavior, whether that's defending him to concerned friends and family, or creating elaborate justifications in your own mind for why his treatment of you is acceptable. This pattern is particularly destructive because it requires you to work against your own perception of reality and to silence both your internal wisdom and the external wisdom of people who care about you. This looks like friends or family expressing concern about how he treats you, and instead of hearing their perspective, you immediately jump to his defense. He's under a lot of stress at work. He's dealing with issues from his past marriage. He's not good at expressing himself. He didn't mean it that way. You're taking it out of context. These defenses might contain elements of truth, but when you're constantly making excuses for someone's poor treatment, you're doing the emotional labor that should belong to him. It also looks like internal justifications that allow you to stay in situations that violate your values and boundaries. You tell yourself that his emotional unavailability is just him being independent. His criticism is him trying to help you improve. His inconsistency is because he's busy, not because you're not a priority. His disrespect is just his sense of humor. His inability to commit is about his past trauma, not about his lack of genuine interest in building something real with you. The psychology behind this pattern is rooted in cognitive dissonance, which is the mental discomfort we experience when our beliefs don't align with reality. When you've invested in someone, when you've developed feelings, when you've built hopes around what the relationship could become, evidence that this person isn't treating you well creates painful dissonance. Your investment says this should be good, but the reality shows it's problematic. To reduce this discomfort, many women unconsciously start rewriting the narrative, creating explanations that make the poor treatment seem reasonable or temporary. This process is reinforced by the sunk cost fallacy. The idea that because you've already invested time, energy, and emotion into this connection, walking away would mean all that investment was wasted. So you double down, you make more excuses, you convince yourself and others that things aren't as bad as they seem, that he's going to change, that you just need to be more patient or understanding. But here's what you need to understand. When you're constantly defending someone's poor behavior, explaining it away, or justifying why it's acceptable, you're not in a healthy relationship. You're in a situation where some part of you knows that how you're being treated is not okay, but you're working hard to override that knowledge because facing it would require you to make difficult decisions. Moreover, when friends or family express concern and you immediately defend the person they're concerned about, you're often cutting yourself off from crucial support and perspective. People who care about you and observe your relationship from the outside can often see patterns and red flags that you're too close to recognize. They notice the change in you, the way you've become smaller or sadder or more anxious. They notice the way he speaks to you or about you. They notice the inconsistencies between what he says and what he does. When you dismiss their concerns or make excuses for his behavior, you're essentially telling them that you don't want to hear perspectives that conflict with the narrative you've constructed. This often causes people to stop sharing their concerns, not because those concerns have disappeared, but because they realize you're not ready to hear them. And this leaves you more isolated, more dependent on the person you're defending, and less likely to have reality checks that might help you see the situation clearly. The alternative is to listen when people who care about you express concern. You don't have to agree with everything they say. You don't have to take every piece of advice, but you should at least consider their perspective instead of immediately dismissing it. You should ask yourself why multiple people might be seeing problems that you're working hard not to see. You should be willing to examine whether the explanations you've been giving yourself actually hold up under scrutiny. This also means being honest with yourself about patterns of behavior, rather than treating each incident as an isolated event with a unique explanation. When you zoom out and look at the overall pattern instead of justifying each individual instance, what do you see? If your best friend described this relationship to you, what would you advise her? If your daughter was being treated this way, would you think it was acceptable? At this stage of your life, you have enough experience to know that when you're constantly making excuses for someone, when you're doing mental gymnastics to justify their behavior, when you're defending them against the observations of people who care about you, something is wrong. Healthy relationships don't require this kind of constant explanation and justification. When someone treats you well, when they respect you and value you, you don't need to convince others or yourself that the relationship is good. It simply is. So stop doing the work of making unacceptable behavior seem acceptable. Stop silencing your own inner voice and the voices of people who care about you. Stop creating elaborate narratives that excuse poor treatment. Start trusting your own perceptions and the observations of people who have your best interests at heart. And if you find yourself constantly having to defend someone or justify their behavior, take that as a clear sign that something fundamental is wrong. Thing number 5, never sacrifice your financial security or independence for a man. The 5th thing you must never do is compromise your financial security or independence for a man, regardless of how much you care about him or how convincing his requests seem. This is absolutely crucial for women at this stage of life, because financial vulnerability in your senior years can have devastating consequences that are difficult or impossible to recover from. Financial compromise looks like many things. It looks like lending money you can't afford to lose. It looks like co-signing loans or taking on debt for someone else's benefit. It looks like allowing someone to move into your home without clear financial arrangements. It looks like combining finances before you have legal protections in place. It looks like giving someone access to your accounts, your credit cards, or your financial information. It looks like changing beneficiaries, signing over assets, or making financial decisions that benefit him at your expense. It also looks like more subtle erosion of financial independence. It looks like always paying when you go out because he's short on money. It looks like covering his expenses because he's between jobs or having financial difficulties. It looks like downplaying your own financial needs or goals to accommodate his. It looks like making yourself smaller financially so he doesn't feel uncomfortable about earning less or having less than you do. The psychology behind why women make these financial compromises is complex and often deeply gendered. Many women at this stage were raised during eras when men were expected to be financial providers and women were expected to be financial dependents. Even women who built successful careers often internalized messages about not emasculating men by having more money or being more financially successful. This can create a dynamic where accomplished, financially secure women actually downplay their resources or make themselves financially vulnerable to make men comfortable. There's also the belief that financial generosity demonstrates love and trust. We think that if we really care about someone, we should be willing to help them financially. We think that holding back financially suggests we don't trust them or don't believe in the relationship. We think that talking about money is unromantic or calculating. These beliefs can lead us to make financial decisions based on emotion rather than wisdom and self-protection. But here's the reality that you must face squarely. Your financial security at this stage of life is sacred. For many women over 60, you're living on fixed incomes, retirement savings, pensions, or Social Security. You likely don't have the option to rebuild your finances if they're compromised. You don't have decades of earning potential ahead of you. Every dollar you have needs to support you potentially for decades of retirement. You cannot afford to be financially generous or cavalier with someone who hasn't earned that trust through legal commitment and proven reliability. Moreover, financial abuse is one of the most common and devastating forms of abuse that older women experience. Con artists and exploitative partners specifically target older women because they often have accumulated assets. They often want companionship, and they've often been socialized to be nurturing and generous. These predators are skilled at creating scenarios that make financial requests seem reasonable, that create urgency, that play on your emotions and your desire to help someone you care about. Even when financial requests don't come from deliberate predators, they can still be destructive. A man who is genuinely struggling financially, but who asks you to compromise your security to help him, is not thinking about your well-being or your future. He's prioritizing his needs over your safety. And that's not love, regardless of how much he claims to care about you. The appropriate boundary is absolute clarity that your financial security is non-negotiable. This means not lending money, not co-signing loans, not taking on debt, not giving access to accounts, not changing beneficiaries, and not making any significant financial decisions that could compromise your security. If someone has a legitimate financial emergency, there are resources, institutions, and programs designed to help. You are not a bank, and your retirement funds are not an emergency fund for someone else's poor planning or bad luck. This also means being clear about financial arrangements if you're considering living together or combining households in any way. You need legal protections, clear written agreements about expenses and contributions, and absolute transparency about financial situations before you make any moves that could impact your housing security or financial stability. If a man responds negatively to these boundaries, if he pressures you, if he makes you feel guilty or selfish, If he suggests that your unwillingness to help him financially means you don't really care about him, these are massive red flags. A man with integrity understands that asking you to compromise your financial security is inappropriate. A man who truly cares about you wants you to be secure and protected, not vulnerable and at risk. At this stage of your life, you need to be absolutely ruthless about protecting your financial independence. This is not selfishness. This is wisdom. This is self-preservation. This is recognizing that your financial security determines whether you can maintain your independence, whether you have choices if the relationship ends, whether you can take care of yourself if your health declines, and whether you're protected from potential exploitation. So make this boundary crystal clear and absolutely firm. Your finances are your own. Your financial security is sacred, and no romantic relationship is worth compromising your ability to take care of yourself now and in the future. Thing number 6, never ignore red flags while focusing only on potential. The 6th thing you must never do is overlook obvious red flags while fixating on someone's potential or on the fantasy of what the relationship could become. This is one of the most common and destructive patterns I see in women of all ages, but it's particularly harmful for senior women who don't have unlimited time to waste on relationships that were never going to become what you hoped they would be. Red flags are behaviors, patterns, and characteristics that indicate someone is not emotionally healthy, not genuinely available, not capable of the kind of relationship you're seeking, or simply not a good match for you. These include things like lying, even about small things, inconsistency between words and actions, unwillingness to introduce you to important people in their life, vagueness about their availability or intentions, disrespect toward you or others, alcohol or substance abuse issues, unresolved anger or bitterness from past relationships, financial irresponsibility or instability, inability to take accountability for their behavior, controlling tendencies, jealousy or possessiveness, love bombing followed by withdrawal. When red flags appear, and they usually appear early in relationships, you have a choice. You can pay attention to them, take them seriously, and make decisions based on the reality of who this person is showing themselves to be. Or you can minimize them, explain them away, and focus instead on the potential you see, on the person you believe they could be, if only the circumstances were different, or if only they worked through their issues. The psychology behind why we ignore red flags is rooted in several cognitive biases. There's confirmation bias, where we seek out information that confirms what we want to believe and dismiss information that contradicts it. We notice the moments when he's charming and attentive and discount the moments when he's disrespectful or unavailable. There's the halo effect, where positive characteristics make us overlook negative ones. Because he's handsome or successful or charming, we downplay the fact that he's also unreliable or dishonest. There's also something called future faking that we do to ourselves. We imagine a future version of the relationship where all the problems have resolved, where he's worked through his issues, where he's become the partner we need him to be. We fall in love with that imagined future rather than accepting the present reality. And every time we see a small positive sign, we tell ourselves it's evidence that we're moving toward that imagined future, even when the overall pattern remains problematic. For women who were raised to be fixers, caretakers, and nurturers, there's also a tendency to see wounded men as projects. We think our love can heal them. We think our patience can change them. We think our understanding and support will help them become their best selves. This can feel deeply meaningful and purposeful, the idea that we're not just in a relationship, but helping someone transform. But the reality is that you cannot love someone into emotional health. You cannot be patient enough to make an emotionally unavailable person available. You cannot nurture someone into treating you with respect if they don't already value respect. At this stage of your life, you need to make decisions based on reality, not potential. You need to believe what people show you about who they are rather than who you hope they might become. You need to take red flags seriously as information about whether this person is capable of meeting your needs and treating you the way you deserve to be treated. This doesn't mean expecting perfection. Everyone has flaws. Everyone has areas where they're still growing, but there's a massive difference between normal human imperfection and fundamental red flags that indicate someone is not capable of or interested in a healthy, mutual, respectful relationship. There's a difference between someone who makes occasional mistakes but takes accountability and someone who repeatedly hurts you and blames you for being hurt. When you notice red flags, especially multiple red flags or patterns of concerning behavior, the appropriate response is to slow down, create space, and observe carefully whether this person is showing you through consistent behavior over time that they're trustworthy, available, and capable of the kind of relationship you're seeking. This means not rushing into commitment, not making excuses for concerning behavior, and being willing to walk away if what you're seeing doesn't align with what you need. It also means being honest with yourself about why you're holding on to potential rather than accepting reality. Is it because you're lonely and you want this to work so badly that you're willing to overlook problems? Is it because you've already invested time and emotion and walking away would feel like failure? Is it because you've convinced yourself that you can't expect anything better at this stage of life? Is it because being with someone who's problematic feels better than being alone? These are understandable feelings, but they cannot be the basis for relationship decisions if you want to protect your well-being. You have to be willing to choose reality over fantasy, even when reality is disappointing. You have to be willing to walk away from potential that's never going to materialize. You have to be willing to trust that there are better options than staying with someone who shows you through their behavior that they're not capable of meeting your needs. At 60 and beyond, you don't have time for rehabilitation projects. You don't have energy for relationships that require you to ignore your intuition and overlook obvious problems. You don't have emotional bandwidth to invest in people who might possibly change if only you're patient enough. You need relationships with people who are already emotionally healthy, already available, already capable of treating you well. And if someone isn't showing you those qualities through consistent behavior, all the potential in the world doesn't matter, because potential without demonstration is just fantasy. So pay attention to red flags. Take them seriously. Don't explain them away or focus on potential instead of reality. And trust that honoring your own perceptions and making decisions based on what is, rather than what could be, is not pessimism. It's wisdom. Thing number 7. Never make yourself smaller to make him feel bigger. The 7th thing you must never do is diminish yourself, your accomplishments, your intelligence, your capabilities, or your worth to make a man feel more comfortable, more confident, or more superior. This is a pattern that many women have engaged in for so long that it feels automatic, but it's profoundly damaging to your sense of self and to the quality of relationships you attract. Making yourself smaller looks like downplaying your accomplishments when you're with him. You've built a successful career, but you don't talk about it because you sense it makes him uncomfortable. You have advanced degrees or expertise in your field, but you play dumb or defer to his opinions even when you know more than he does. You're financially secure, but you pretend to need his help or advice because you've learned that men often feel threatened by women who don't need them. It looks like softening your personality to seem less intimidating. You're naturally confident and outspoken, but you make yourself quieter and more agreeable around him. You have strong opinions, but you keep them to yourself. or couch them in qualifiers because you don't want to seem too assertive or difficult. You're funny and sharp-witted, but you dull your humor because you've noticed he doesn't like being the target of jokes or doesn't appreciate wit that outpaces his own. It looks like managing his ego at the expense of your authenticity. You pretend to need his help with things you could easily do yourself. You ask for his opinion on decisions you've already made because you know he likes to feel consulted. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You compliment him excessively while downplaying your own worth. You make him the star of every story, even when you're the one who accomplished something. The psychology behind this pattern is rooted in generations of conditioning that taught women to make themselves small so men could feel large. We were taught that men need to feel needed, that they have fragile egos that we must carefully protect, that our worth comes from supporting and uplifting men rather than shining in our own right. We were taught that men are intimidated by successful women, by intelligent women, by confident women, and that if we want relationships, we need to hide these qualities or at least not flaunt them. This conditioning is particularly strong for women who are now in their 60s and beyond, who came of age during eras when women were just beginning to enter professions and educational opportunities that had been reserved for men. Many women from this generation learned to navigate male-dominated spaces by making themselves as non-threatening as possible, by giving men credit for their ideas, by downplaying their own competence and capabilities. These strategies may have been necessary for survival in certain contexts, but they become toxic when they're imported into intimate relationships. When you make yourself smaller to make a man feel bigger, you're not building a healthy partnership. You're creating a dynamic based on deception where he's relating to a diminished version of you rather than your authentic self. And this sets up several serious problems. First, you can't maintain this kind of performance indefinitely. At some point, your real self will emerge. Your real capabilities will become visible. Your real personality will assert itself. And when that happens, he may feel deceived or threatened because he thought he was in a relationship with someone different. The relationship may not survive the revelation of who you actually are. Second, this pattern attracts men who are insecure, who need to feel superior, who can't handle being with a woman who matches or exceeds their accomplishments. Secure, emotionally healthy men aren't threatened by capable women. They're attracted to them. They want partners who challenge them, who have their own strengths and accomplishments, who don't need to pretend to be less than they are. When you make yourself smaller, you filter out the men who would appreciate you at your full size and attract the men who require you to be diminished. Third, making yourself smaller chips away at your self-esteem and your sense of identity. When you spend significant time and energy hiding parts of yourself, downplaying your worth, and performing a diminished version of who you really are, it affects how you see yourself. You internalize the message that who you really are is too much, that your authentic self is unlovable, that you need to hide your light to be acceptable. This is deeply damaging psychologically and spiritually. At this stage of your life, after all you've accomplished and overcome, after all the wisdom you've gained and the strength you've developed, you deserve to be with someone who celebrates your full self. You deserve a partner who is proud of your accomplishments, who appreciates your intelligence, who loves your confidence, who values your capabilities. You deserve someone who feels lucky to be with you as you actually are, not as a diminished version created to protect his ego. This means showing up fully from the beginning of any new relationship. It means talking about your accomplishments without apology. It means expressing your opinions without softening them. It means being as funny, as smart, as capable, as confident as you actually are. It means refusing to play small so someone else can feel big. And if a man responds negatively to your full self, if he seems threatened or uncomfortable, if he makes comments suggesting you should tone it down or be less of who you are. That's crucial information. That's not a man who can handle a real partnership with a fully realized woman. That's a man who needs you to be smaller than you are, and you should thank him for revealing this and move on. The right person for you will not require you to diminish yourself. They will love your strength, your intelligence, your accomplishments. They will want you to shine, not to hide your light. They will feel bigger, not because you've made yourself smaller, but because being with you inspires them to grow and expand their own life. That's the kind of partnership you should hold out for. So stop making yourself smaller. Stop downplaying your accomplishments. Stop hiding your intelligence. Stop softening your personality. Stop protecting fragile male egos at the expense of your authenticity. Show up fully, shine brightly, and trust that the right person will love you not despite your bigness, but because of it. Thing number 8, never accept future promises in place of present action. The 8th thing you must never do is accept future promises as substitutes for present action. Allowing someone to string you along with talk about what they're going to do someday, rather than evaluating what they're actually doing today. This is a manipulation tactic that keeps you invested in a relationship based on potential and promises, while the present reality shows you someone who isn't showing up, isn't following through, and isn't treating you the way they claim they will eventually. Future promises look like vague statements about the future that never materialize into concrete action in the present. He talks about how he's going to take you on a trip, but he never actually plans it or books it. He mentions introducing you to his family or friends someday, but months or years pass and it hasn't happened. He discusses moving in together or getting more serious eventually, but there's always a reason why now isn't the right time. He promises he's going to make more time for you once work calms down, once he deals with some personal issues, once things settle down, but work never calms down, and things never settle down. This pattern creates a dynamic where you're constantly oriented toward a future that never arrives while accepting a present that doesn't meet your needs. You stay invested because of what he says is coming rather than leaving because of what's actually happening. This is particularly effective as a manipulation tactic because it gives you just enough hope to stay while never delivering enough substance to actually build something real. The psychology behind why we accept future promises instead of demanding present action is related to our tendency to believe what people say rather than focusing solely on what they do. We want to trust that people mean what they say, that their words represent their intentions, that promises made will be promises kept. This is especially true in romantic contexts, where we're emotionally invested and want to believe that the person we care about is being honest with us. There's also a cognitive bias called optimism bias, where we tend to believe that positive outcomes are more likely than they statistically are. When someone promises that things will improve, that they'll change their behavior, that they'll show up differently in the future, we want to believe them. We focus on those promises and imagine the future they describe, rather than looking objectively at the pattern of promises that haven't been kept. For women specifically, many of us were raised to be patient, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to believe in people's capacity to change. These aren't inherently bad qualities, but they become problematic when they make us ignore patterns of behavior in favor of words that sound good but produce no action. At this stage of your life, you need to be absolutely clear about a fundamental truth of human behavior. People show you who they are and what they value through their actions, not their words. If someone's words and actions don't align, trust the actions. If someone makes promises they don't keep, trust the pattern of broken promises rather than the new promise. If someone talks about a future that never seems to get any closer, trust that you're being strung along rather than believing that the timing will eventually be right. This doesn't mean that people never change or that promises are meaningless. It means that real change shows up in behavioral change, and real promises are demonstrated through follow-through. If someone tells you they're going to make you more of a priority, you should see concrete changes in how they allocate their time and energy. If someone says they're ready to get more serious, you should see movement toward greater commitment and integration of your lives. If someone promises to introduce you to important people in their life, that should happen in a reasonable time frame. When promises are made but no action follows, when the same promises are made repeatedly without ever materializing, when there's always an explanation for why the timing isn't right yet, you're not dealing with someone who has genuine intentions. You're dealing with someone who knows that making promises buys them more time, more patience from you, more willingness to accept less than you deserve in the present. The appropriate response is to make clear that you make decisions based on what is, not what might be. This means telling someone directly that you appreciate what they say about the future, but you need to see that demonstrated through consistent action in the present. It means setting specific timelines. If he says he wants to introduce you to his friends, that should happen within weeks, not years. If he talks about taking the relationship to the next level, what does that actually mean, and when will you see movement in that direction? It also means being willing to walk away when words and actions don't align, when promises are made repeatedly without any follow-through. Someone who genuinely wants what they claim to want will demonstrate it through their behavior. Someone who just wants to keep you on the hook will keep you oriented toward a future that never arrives. At this point in your life, you don't have unlimited time to wait for some days and maybes. You can't afford to invest years in promises that never materialize. You need to base your decisions on what's actually happening rather than what someone says might happen eventually. So stop accepting future promises in place of present action. Stop waiting for the right time that never seems to come. Stop believing that things will change when you've been told they'll change multiple times before without seeing any actual change. Pay attention to what people do, not just what they say, and make your relationship decisions based on the reality of how someone shows up today, not the fantasy of how they promise to show up tomorrow. Thing number 9. Never compromise your values, morals, or integrity for a relationship. The 9th thing you must never do is compromise your fundamental values, morals, or integrity to maintain a relationship or to avoid conflict with a man. Your values are your moral compass, the principles that guide your decisions and define who you are. When you compromise them for a relationship, you lose connection with your authentic self and create a foundation of betrayal that erodes your self-respect and your ability to trust yourself. Compromising your values looks like going along with behavior you find morally questionable because you don't want to rock the boat. Maybe he's dishonest in his business dealings, and while you value honesty, you convince yourself it's not your place to judge. Maybe he speaks disrespectfully about women, minorities, or other groups, and while you believe in treating all people with dignity, you stay silent because calling it out would create tension. Maybe he asks you to lie for him, to cover for him, to participate in deception, and you do it even though honesty is a core value for you. It looks like tolerating treatment that violates your fundamental beliefs about how people should treat each other. You believe relationships should be based on mutual respect, but you accept disrespectful treatment. You believe in fidelity and honesty, but you tolerate lying or cheating. You believe in equality, but you accept a dynamic where you're expected to serve and submit. You believe in kindness, but you rationalize cruelty. It looks like participating in activities or situations that conflict with your moral framework. Maybe he wants you to engage sexually in ways that don't feel right to you, and you agree even though it violates your sense of what's appropriate for you. Maybe he pressures you to spend time with people who make you uncomfortable or who engage in behavior you find unethical. Maybe he wants you to keep the relationship secret in ways that make you feel like you're colluding in deception. The psychology behind why people compromise their values in relationships is complex. There's the fear that standing firm in your values will cause conflict, and many women are conditioned to avoid conflict at all costs. There's the rationalization that love requires flexibility, that you should meet someone halfway, that your values are perhaps too rigid or too judgmental. There's the fear that if you're too principled, you'll be alone. There's also a slippery slope that happens with value compromise. It often starts small. You overlook one thing that doesn't quite sit right with you, telling yourself it's not a big deal. Then you overlook another, then another. Each compromise makes the next one easier to justify. Before you realize what's happened, you're behaving in ways that your younger self wouldn't recognize, participating in dynamics that fundamentally conflict with who you are and what you believe. The damage of value compromise is profound. When you betray your own values to maintain a relationship, you lose respect for yourself. Every time you act in ways that conflict with your integrity, you chip away at your self-esteem. You can't feel good about yourself when you're not being true to yourself. And this self-betrayal is more damaging to your well-being than being alone could ever be. Moreover, when you compromise your values for someone, you're teaching them that you don't really mean what you say, that your boundaries are negotiable, that enough pressure or the threat of losing the relationship will cause you to abandon your principles. This doesn't create respect or appreciation, it creates contempt. People don't ultimately value or respect those who will betray themselves to keep them. At this stage of your life, after all you've experienced and all you've learned about what matters, your values and integrity are precious. They're the foundation of who you are. They're what allow you to live with yourself, to look at yourself in the mirror with respect, to feel that your life has meaning and purpose beyond just surviving or being partnered. This means being absolutely clear about what your non-negotiable values are and refusing to compromise them for any relationship. If honesty is a core value, you won't lie for someone or participate in deception. If respect is non-negotiable, you won't accept disrespectful treatment no matter how much you care about the person delivering it. If equality in relationships matters to you, you won't accept dynamics that require submission or servitude. If kindness and compassion are fundamental to who you are, you won't participate in cruelty or stay silent while others are mistreated. This doesn't mean being rigid or inflexible about everything. Healthy relationships do require compromise on preferences, on small decisions, on differences in style or taste. But there's a massive difference between compromising on where to eat dinner and compromising on fundamental values. There's a difference between meeting someone halfway on logistics and betraying who you are at your core. When someone asks you to compromise your values, explicitly or implicitly, that's a sign of fundamental incompatibility. It means that who you are at your core conflicts with what this relationship requires of you. And when that's the case, the relationship isn't right for you. Matter how much you might care about the person or how lonely you might be without them. The appropriate response is to be clear about your values from early in any relationship and to reinforce them through your behavior. When something conflicts with your values, you name it clearly. This doesn't align with my values. This isn't something I'm willing to participate in. This crosses a line for me. And then you follow through. If the person respects your values, they'll adjust their behavior or their requests. If they continue to pressure you or expect you to compromise your integrity, they're showing you that the relationship is more important to them than your wholeness as a person. At 60 and beyond, you've lived according to your values through challenging circumstances. You've made difficult choices to maintain your integrity. You've learned what happens when you betray yourself and what it feels like to live in alignment with who you really are. Honor that knowledge, trust that wisdom, and refuse to compromise the foundation of who you are for any relationship, no matter how appealing it might seem in other ways. Your values and integrity are yours. They belong to you. They define you. And no relationship is worth losing yourself over. So stand firm in who you are and what you believe, and trust that the right relationship will celebrate your integrity rather than requiring you to compromise it. Thing number 10, never stay silent about your needs while hoping he'll eventually notice and meet them. The 10th and final thing you must never do is remain silent about your needs, hoping that if you're patient enough, accommodating enough, or good enough, he'll eventually notice what you need and start providing it without you having to ask. This is perhaps one of the most common relationship patterns women engage in, and it's almost always a recipe for resentment, disappointment, and unfulfilled needs. Staying silent about your needs looks like knowing what would make you feel valued, loved, and secure, but never actually expressing these things. You want more quality time together, but instead of saying so, you wait to see if he'll suggest it. You need more verbal affirmation and appreciation, but instead of asking for it, you silently wish he was more expressive. You want him to help more with certain tasks, or to plan dates occasionally, but instead of communicating this, you hope he'll eventually think of it himself. It looks like dropping hints rather than making direct requests. You mention casually that you've never been to a particular restaurant, hoping he'll interpret this as a request to take you there. You sigh when you're doing tasks alone that you'd like help with, hoping he'll offer. You talk about what your friends' partners do for them, hoping he'll get the message that you'd like similar gestures. You test him by creating situations where he could meet your needs if he was paying attention, and you feel hurt and disappointed when he doesn't pass these unspoken tests. It looks like telling yourself that if he really loved you, he would know what you need without being told. You believe that having to ask for what you need diminishes its value, that it should be spontaneous, that explaining what you need means you're being demanding or high maintenance. You believe that good partners are intuitive enough to figure out what each other needs without explicit communication. The psychology behind this pattern is rooted in several misconceptions about relationships and love. Many women were taught that asking for what you need is selfish or demanding, that good women are low maintenance and don't require much, that being satisfied with whatever you're given is a virtue. We were taught that men should pursue and provide, and that if we have to ask for things, it means we're not valued enough for those things to be offered freely. There's also a romantic notion that true love involves mind reading, that people who are really meant for each other have an almost magical ability to understand each other without words. This idea is reinforced by popular culture, by romance novels and movies where partners intuitively know exactly what each other needs. But real relationships don't work that way. People are not mind readers, and what seems obvious to you based on your needs, your past experiences, and your communication style may be completely non-obvious to someone with different needs, different experiences, and different ways of understanding relationships. When you stay silent about your needs, several destructive patterns develop. First, your needs don't get met, which leads to growing frustration and resentment. You can see what you need clearly. You can imagine how good it would feel to have those needs met, but they remain consistently unfulfilled. This creates a gap between what you need and what you're experiencing, and that gap breeds unhappiness. Second, you build resentment toward your partner for not meeting needs they don't even know you have. You interpret their failure to meet your unspoken needs as evidence that they don't care, don't pay attention, or don't value you enough. But they may have no idea what you're hoping for. They may think everything is fine because you haven't indicated otherwise. Your silence doesn't communicate anything except possibly contentment. Third, you create an unfair dynamic where you're constantly testing your partner against standards they're unaware of. You set up situations designed to see if they'll meet your needs without being asked. And when they fail these tests, you feel hurt and disappointed. But these tests are unfair because they're based on expectations you've never communicated. Fourth, staying silent about your needs often leads to passive-aggressive behavior. Because you can't express your needs directly, you express your frustration and disappointment indirectly through subtle criticism, withdrawal of affection, complaints about unrelated things, or comparisons to other people's relationships. This creates tension and conflict without addressing the actual underlying issue. At this stage of your life, you need to understand that clear, direct communication about your needs is not a sign of weakness, neediness, or poor communication skills in your partner. It's a sign of emotional maturity and healthy relationship functioning. People who care about you want to meet your needs, but they need to know what those needs are. Different people have different needs, different preferences, different ways of feeling loved and valued. What feels like obvious care to one person might not even register for another. This means practicing direct communication about your needs. Instead of hoping he'll suggest spending time together, you say, "I'd like to spend more quality time together, maybe a date night once a week." Instead of wishing he was more verbally appreciative, you say, "I feel valued when you express appreciation for specific things I do. Would you be willing to do that more often?" Instead of dropping hints about wanting help, you make direct requests. "Could you help me with this? I'd appreciate your input on this decision." This kind of direct communication feels vulnerable because it involves acknowledging that you have needs, that you're not completely self-sufficient, that you want something from another person. But this vulnerability is actually the foundation of intimacy. When you can express your needs clearly and your partner responds by trying to meet them, you build trust and closeness. When you hide your needs and expect mind reading, you build distance and resentment. It's also important to understand that how someone responds to clearly communicated needs tells you everything you need to know about whether they're capable of being a good partner to you. If you express a need clearly and they dismiss it, minimize it, or refuse to even try to meet it, that's crucial information. It tells you that either they don't value your needs or they're not capable of stretching to meet them. Either way, that's a sign of incompatibility. But if you express a need and they listen, ask questions to understand better, and make genuine efforts to meet that need, even if they don't do it perfectly, that's a sign of someone who cares about your well-being and is willing to grow in the relationship. That's the kind of partner worth investing in. At 60 and beyond, you don't have time to waste in relationships where your needs go unmet because you never expressed them. You don't have energy for the resentment and disappointment that builds when you're constantly hoping someone will intuitively know what you need. You deserve relationships where both people are clear about their needs, where both people make genuine efforts to meet each other's needs, and where both people feel valued and cared for. So stop staying silent about your needs. Stop testing your partner against unspoken expectations. Stop believing that having to ask diminishes the value of what you receive. Start communicating clearly, directly, and without apology about what you need. And pay attention to how your partner responds, because that response will tell you whether this is someone who can truly be a partner to you in the fullest sense. We've covered a lot of ground today, and I want to take a moment to acknowledge that some of what we've discussed may have been difficult to hear. Perhaps you recognized yourself in some of these patterns. Perhaps you realized that you've been doing some or many of these things in your current relationship or in past relationships. If that's the case, I want you to know that there's no judgment here. These patterns are deeply ingrained through decades of socialization, and recognizing them is the first and most important step toward changing them. The 10 things we've discussed today: abandoning your own life for his, accepting breadcrumbs of attention, tolerating disrespect disguised as humor or honesty, making excuses for poor behavior, compromising your financial security, ignoring red flags while focusing on potential, making yourself smaller, accepting future promises instead of present action, compromising your values and staying silent about your needs. These are all ways that women diminish themselves in relationships, and every single one of them is something you have the power to stop doing starting right now. You don't need permission to set these boundaries. You don't need to wait until you're in a new relationship to implement these standards. You can start applying them today in whatever relationship situation you're currently in. And yes, implementing these boundaries may create tension. It may lead to difficult conversations. It may even lead to the end of relationships that can't survive you honoring yourself. But I promise you that living with integrity, honoring your needs, and refusing to betray yourself is worth whatever temporary discomfort change might bring. At 60 and beyond, you have earned the right to be exactly who you are without apology. You have earned the right to expect reciprocity, respect, and genuine care in your relationships. You have earned the right to say no to anything that compromises your well-being, your dignity, or your peace. And you absolutely have earned the right to be alone and content rather than partnered and diminished. The right relationship for you at this stage of life is one where you can show up fully as yourself and be celebrated for it. It's one where your boundaries are respected, your needs are heard, and your worth is recognized. It's one where you give and receive in equal measure. It's one where you feel more alive, more yourself, more at peace, not less. And that kind of relationship becomes possible when you stop doing the things that attract and maintain unhealthy dynamics and start honoring yourself in the ways we've discussed today. Before we close, I want to remind you once again to please like this video if you found it valuable. Your engagement helps this content reach other women who need to hear this message. Please share this video with friends, sisters, or any woman in your life who might benefit from this discussion. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for each other is share resources that help us see our situations more clearly and give us permission to honor ourselves. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, please do so now and turn on notifications so you don't miss future content. We regularly discuss relationship psychology, emotional intelligence, manipulation tactics to watch for, and strategies for building the life you deserve at any age. Your subscription tells me that this content matters to you and encourages me to keep creating it. I also want to encourage you once more to leave a comment, sharing your thoughts, your experiences, or your insights. This community of women supporting each other through honest conversation is powerful, and your voice adds to that power. What resonated most with you from today's discussion? Which of these 10 things have you struggled with? What boundaries are you committing to setting? Share your story because it might be exactly what another woman needs to hear to find her own courage. And finally, if you're able to support this channel financially through super thanks, I'm deeply grateful. Creating content that prioritizes depth, honesty, and your well-being over sensationalism and clickbait takes time and resources. Your financial support, whatever amount you're able to contribute, makes it possible for me to continue doing this work. Every contribution, no matter how small, matters and is genuinely appreciated. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for being willing to look honestly at these patterns and to consider making different choices. Thank you for valuing yourself enough to watch a video about honoring your boundaries and your worth. You deserve relationships that celebrate you, that support you, and that treat you with the dignity and respect you've always deserved. Remember, it's never too late to start honoring yourself. It's never too late to set boundaries. It's never too late to expect better, and it's never too late to choose yourself. Until next time, take care of yourself, honor your worth, and never forget that you are valuable, you are worthy, and you deserve to be treated accordingly.